Chapter 5. Where to now? Trey asked when they were both seated in the truck. First, the hardware store. Do you know how to change out a doorknob? Cindy asked. She'd never done it herself, but she knew how to follow instructions, so if he couldn't, she knew she could. He shrugged. Sure. It's easy. Good, then you can do that. We can't have you scandalizing any more old ladies. He grinned. I really wish I had seen all that. Sounds hilarious. Why were you working in your underwear anyway? She asked. I mean, who does that? He shrugged. I got into the habit when I didn't have to go into the office anymore. Cut down on laundry, and I was more comfortable to work. Made sense to me. I guess I wasn't thinking, with the privacy sign on the door, that anyone would walk in and see me that way. At least I didn't have my tallywhacker out for the world to see. Cindy choked on a laugh. Tallywhacker? Did men even use that word? Sure. Unless you want me to call it something else? Cindy shook her head, still chuckling. She was not ready to go there with him. Tallywhacker works. She directed him to the hardware store, trying to stop being amused and concentrate on the task at hand. They held hands as they walked into the hardware store, the man running it an old friend of her grandfather's. He looked her up and down. You don't look dead yet. Cindy laughed and walked around the counter to hug the old man. I'm doing just fine, Mr. Scobie. He's treating me just fine. We're all worried about you. It's just not right to marry a man who you never met. He eyed Trey as if he was an escaped criminal. You need to get to know him. He's a good man. Even Grandpa would like him. She glanced over to see Trey shopping for the doorknobs. Hopefully she could calm Mr. Scobie before Trey had to talk to him. You checked yet if he has a criminal record? Are you sure he's not a mass murderer? I haven't personally, but the matchmaker I saw has. She made sure he was safe for me to be around. I promise. You just call me if you have any trouble. I may be old, but I still have my hunting rifle. Cindy patted his arm. I know you do, Mr. Scobie. Remember I took karate when I was in high school. Grandpa made you go to the ceremony when I got my black belt. Mr. Scobie nodded emphatically. He wouldn't let you go off to school until you could protect yourself. He was a good man, Cinderella. He was. I miss him every day. Well, Cinderella, I have 2 doorknobs for us now. Trey grinned at her, his eyes filled with amusement. You never told me your real name was Cinderella. I was saving that as an anniversary gift. She shrugged. And I promise to call you Trey as long as you promise not to call me Cinderella. Trey paid for their purchases, ignoring the glares from Mr. Scobie. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders as they left the store. Who named you anyway? She sighed. My mother. She loved fairy tales. It was that or Ariel, and Grandma had the foresight to talk her into Cinderella, knowing it could be shortened to Cindy. Your grandmother was very wise. Yes. Yes, she was. At their next stop, they split up again, and Cindy wandered to the men's underwear section to pick him up a fun gift, before she went to the women's section to get more bra and panty matching sets. She'd never cared before, but suddenly, she didn't want to be caught with old or non-matching underwear. She was sure it would wear off in time, but she wanted to look her best for her new husband. Even when she was just in her skivvies. She went to the front to buy the things she'd purchased, and was pleased to see Trey didn't notice her and went to a line at the other side of the store. She paid quickly, making sure everything was double-bagged, so he wouldn't see through to what she'd bought. When they got to the truck, he put his bag in a toolbox in the back, locking it, and she put hers at her feet. Neither of them mentioned the other hiding the bags, and neither asked what was in the other's bag. Cindy pretended they had never stopped there as she gave him direction to the grocery store. I do think I want to keep having lunch with Sissy most days, she told him. Let's pick out things that I can cook for you easily for lunch, and that you can cook for yourself. Is that the only reason we're here? She shook her head. No, of course not. I need to pick up breakfast foods and things for dinner. I wanted your input on your lunches, though, because I just don't know yet what you like. By the time they reached the front of the store, she realized he hadn't been joking on their wedding day. He did have the taste buds of a 10-year-old boy, and he wasn't ashamed of it. She had frozen dinners, macaroni and cheese, and Chef Boyardee ravioli. She also had American cheese and a big pack of ramen. She didn't say a word as she purchased the junk, knowing that it would make it easier on her, even though it wasn't healthy for him. Of course, she couldn't say a lot eating fried cheese curds every day for lunch, but she was from Wisconsin. What was his excuse? When they got home, he wandered off to his office to handle the doorknob situation, while she put away the groceries. When he added a lock to their bedroom door as well, she smiled. Making sure we're not interrupted? He winked at her. Never going to happen. She raised an eyebrow at him, wondering how he was going to react when children came along. They would interrupt when they felt like interrupting. Of course, she was on the pill until she was certain he was the man she wanted to have children with. She believed in the sanctity of marriage, and had no intention of getting a divorce, but these were odd circumstances, and she was going to be sure of him before she brought children into the mix. She calmly continued to put the groceries away. She'd stuck the special bag she'd gotten behind her bags of flour and sugar, so even if he was searching through the kitchen for something to eat, he wouldn't accidentally stumble on them. Trey walked up behind her when he finished with the second doorknob, his arms going around her waist, and his lips going to her neck. We have a locking bedroom door now, he whispered against her neck. Wanna try it out? She shivered at the feel of his lips on her neck, combined with his slow Texas drawl. What was it about a man who couldn't speak quite right that made her weak in the knees? I have to prep breakfast for tomorrow, and there's a new guest checking in at 3. I can't. She turned fully in his arms and wrapped her arms around his neck, kissing him again. I wish I had time though. You can't make time? She shook her head. I really can't. I have to get everything prepped before my guest arrives in 15 minutes. He sighed. I understand putting business before pleasure, I guess. I'm going to wander around outside and take some pictures then. I'll start building your website while I'm off this week. She grinned, excited at the prospect. If you want to take pictures of the rooms, 3, 5, and 6 are all vacant. Sounds good. He wandered off, a bit frustrated, but he did understand her feelings. He'd put his business first for years, and that's why he was where he was professionally. He couldn't hold her back when she wanted the same things he did. As he wandered around the property taking pictures, he saw a little old lady, who marched up to him. I do not appreciate you sitting around in your underclothes where anyone can see you. You should have more decency than that, young man. He slipped the phone he'd been using to take pictures back into his pocket. You don't think you could have been a little bit at fault by not reading the sign on the door? The one that said, private, keep out? 'Cause really, if you ask me, you deserve what you get when you walk into a room where you have no business being. Aren't you glad I was wearing my underwear and not sitting there totally naked? She gaped at him for a moment, her jaw dropping. Well, I never. Maybe that's your problem, ma'am. If you did, you'd feel a lot better. Less tense and stuff. He said nothing else as he slipped his phone out of his pocket and snapped a picture of the front of the house, looking at it on his phone with a critical eye. Yes, that would work beautifully. He could feel her still staring at him as he wandered off and took a picture of the barn that had been cleaned and remodeled. Cindy had told him it was used for events. People would rent the building for weddings or whatever they were planning. He could see why it was a good place to use. She had also said they did hayrides in the fall, and in the winter, she hired someone to take people for sleigh rides. They may be out of the way, but it was a great way to pull city people in. Where else could you go for a sleigh ride? He snapped several pictures of the barn, and even a couple of the sleigh after taking the cover off. It was made of solid oak and polished to perfection. She had the means for a good business here, and not just for the band B. He was more than a little impressed by his wife's business acumen. He finished taking pictures of the drive and the house from various angles before going back to the office. He wanted to build himself a small shed where he could have air conditioning and heat, and where he could work in total privacy. The noise of the main house bothered him, which was why he'd taken to blasting his music into his headphones. In his office, he sat at his computer and started toying for a minute or two, playing with the website. He knew if he could show the little operation to its best advantage, he could make sure there was never an empty room. For himself, he preferred the rooms empty, but he knew Cindy had put her heart and soul into the place, and she wouldn't be happy until it was full. He lost himself in his work, as he always did, the headphones blaring music into his ears. Asterisk. Cindy smiled sweetly at the older couple who had come to stay. "We're happy to have you here. Where are you from?" she asked as she found their key and had them sign the ledger. "Ohio," the older woman answered with a huge smile on her face. "Oh, wonderful. I went to school in Ohio, got my bachelor's degree there." "What part of Ohio?" "We live in Akron, dear, but we met at OSU in Columbus 50 years ago." "Is that where you went?" "It is. My best friend and I went there, much to the annoyance of our families. My grandfather told me I was being a traitor to the great state of Wisconsin, and maybe I was, but I had to get out for a few years." "And you came back?" Mrs. Robinson responded. "Yes, ma'am, but a little too late. My grandfather died a week before I graduated. He never knew I came home." "Oh, I'm sorry," Mrs. Robinson responded sadly. "He knows now." Cindy smiled, handing the older woman a key. "Yes, he does know now. Would you like help with your bags? You're in room 4. "No, Chester will help me with my bags, won't you, Chester?" Mr. Robinson had been staring out the window with a glazed look in his eye. "Oh, yes, dear. Whatever you say, dear." Mrs. Robinson leaned forward. "You have to train them from day one. Are you married?" Cindy nodded. "I got married on Saturday. A newlywed. I'd love to meet your young man while we're here. I would be happy to introduce you. He's off taking pictures of the property right now. He's going to build me a website." Mrs. Robinson clapped her hands together. "Won't that be lovely? I truly enjoy the internet." She looked at her husband. "Come along, Chester. Bring the bags." Mr. Robinson picked up a suitcase that looked like he'd had it since the Second World War. "Yes, dear." He trailed along behind her, carrying the suitcase up the stairs. Cindy was smiling after the older couple when the front door slammed closed, the bell over the door making a loud banging sound. Cindy sighed when she saw who it was, wishing she didn't have to deal with the woman. "Are you all right, Mrs. Graham? That man. How dare you let him stay on the property with paying guests?" Cindy frowned, drawing her brows together. "What man?" "The naked man from earlier. Do you know he had the audacity to tell me that if I hadn't intruded and gone where I shouldn't be, I wouldn't have had to see him in his underclothes?" And then. Cindy closed her eyes as she waited for the "and then." She didn't want to think about what he'd said to her. "And then what, Mrs. Graham?" "And then, he intimated that I would feel a lot better if I was involved in more sexual activity." Mrs. Graham dropped her voice to a whisper as she said the last 2 words, as if she was worried someone would hear her and she'd burn in hell for saying them. Cindy choked back a laugh. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Graham. You see, that man and I are newly married, and he thinks everything boils down to, she carefully looked both ways before saying, sexual activity. Mrs. Graham covered her mouth as if she was shocked that Cindy would discuss that in front of her. Maybe this isn't the place I should be staying. Cindy wanted to care, but she couldn't. Maybe not. We're not trying to upset you with our happiness. Mrs. Graham turned and walked away, and Cindy bit her lip, trying not to say anything to her. Instead, she tidied up her desk in the foyer of the house and walked into the kitchen. She didn't want Mrs. Graham to leave a bad review on any of the travel websites where the band B was listed, but the woman was on her last nerve. In the kitchen, she peeled some potatoes to mash to go with the beef tips she'd started earlier, and then she chopped vegetables for a salad. She put the dough she'd had rising in the refrigerator all day into the oven for a fresh loaf of bread. She'd used a store-bought frozen loaf of dough, instead of making her own, because of how busy she'd been. She'd really thought that having a man around would be the same as it was before he was there, but there was so much more involved in being married than she'd realized. She put together a pineapple upside-down cake and decided to slip that into the oven as they sat down to dinner. She would serve it with caramel drizzled over it, and they would eat it warm. She loved warm pineapple upside-down cake. She poured them each a glass of milk and mashed the potatoes, finally ready for dinner. The bread had 3 minutes left on it. She hurried down the hall and put her hand on his shoulder to get his attention, because he was blaring his music in his headphones again. He turned to her with a smile. I kept my clothes on while I worked this time. She laughed. So proud of you. Time to eat. She hurried back out of the room, knowing he'd follow. She had to make sure the bread didn't burn. The table was set and the bread was on a plate when he walked in. He smelled the air deeply. Oh, wow. That smells fantastic. He took his seat at the table and she fixed his plate for him, setting it in front of him. I won't cook like this every night, of course, but I thought you might like a real meal for a change. While they ate, he talked about the work he'd done on the website. Have you thought about having sleigh rides every Friday and Saturday evening during the snowy months? I think you could make a lot more money that way. Locals would come out and you could book rides. She nodded, thinking about it. I have thought about it. I also want to have a few more snowmobiles for people to rent. We have 4, but with as much property as we have, we could accommodate another couple dozen. This is a 40-acre farm. Why don't you? He asked, surprised it was something she thought about, but hadn't put into practice. She shrugged. I really hate the idea of going into debt for anything. My grandpa was completely against debt, and I've never had so much as a credit card. In another year, if things go like projected, I'll be able to add 4 more snowmobiles. He frowned at that. I don't like debt either, but I think that's something we need. He debated internally for a moment before finally saying, let me buy 4 of them. Then in a year you buy another 4. How much is a snowmobile anyway? I've never even seen one except on TV or in magazines. About 13,000 or so. Some more, some less. He half choked at that. That's a lot. Hence, we only have 4 snowmobiles. Could we buy a few used ones and fix them up? He had the money, but that was a lot to spend on them. He would enjoy learning to work on motors and keep them in tip-top condition. She studied him for a moment, before nodding. Yeah, we could. I've considered doing just that myself, but I wasn't sure I'd have enough time to work on them. Wait, you could work on one? He asked, surprised. He'd never known a woman who could work on a motor. She grinned. My grandpa taught me so much about so many things. Yes, I could work on one. Why don't I do some research on some good ones to buy used and see what I can do while I'm only working half days this week? I can search while I'm out. Then we can work on them together. He shrugged, giving her a dopey grin. I find I really like the idea of working on them with you. Maybe I'm a dork. Okay, I'm definitely a dork, but maybe I'm dorkier than I thought. I love the idea of working on motors with my best girl. Cindy smiled. You're nuts. You're something else, you know that? Trey asked. You can cook like this, he said, waving to the food she'd prepared. You can fix up a motor, and you can do it all while looking so incredibly sexy, you take my breath away. Cindy blushed. Well, I've been taught to be self-sufficient. I think I learned well. Oh, you definitely did. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed it. Is there anything you can't do? She shrugged. I've always had issues peeing standing up. It's one of those things that just seems to be beyond me. He shook his head. You are also really good at ruining a moment, you know. He laughed softly. Why would you say that? Well, it's true. I'm sure it is. He sighed. I was feeling all loving, and I think I was doing a great job expressing it, and you come back with something like that. How is a man supposed to react to that? She frowned. I really don't know. I guess I should pay attention to your moments better, huh? It would be nice. After they finished eating, she got up to do the dishes, surprised when he stood to join her. You don't have to help me with the dishes, she protested. I can get them. I can help. I really don't mind. He slipped his arm around her, leaning down to whisper in her ear. If I help, we can go to bed faster. Always thinking about your tallywhacker. Not really, he said with a grin. Usually I'm thinking with my tallywhacker. There's a difference, you know. She took the crock pot liner out of the crock pot and dropped it into the trash before swiping the pot out quickly and putting it back on the base. She watched as he loaded the dishwasher and shuddered. He'd obviously never been taught. So many people said there was no right or wrong way to load a dishwasher, but there was a right way. And it was the exact opposite of the way he was doing it. She debated for a moment, wondering if she should crush his desire to help by showing him the right way to do it, or just let it go and rewash everything in the morning. Really, though, there was no choice. She had to have clean dishes in the morning for breakfast. You know, I'm really picky about how a dishwasher is loaded, she said cautiously. Would you mind putting away the leftovers while I do that? Then I won't get all twitchy from it being done differently. He laughed. Are you telling me that I'm not loading the dishwasher right? I'm working really hard at not telling you that. He shook his head, but walked to the table and carefully put the leftovers away. You'll have to let me know if I'm doing this right. She ignored his playful teasing, knowing he understood what she was trying to say without saying it. She was thankful he hadn't taken offense. She rearranged everything in the dishwasher to her own specifications, and then finished loading everything else. She was going to train him to be a good husband if it killed them both. He swept for her, and she tried not to notice the things he missed. That could easily be redone in the morning. She wouldn't complain about him doing anything else wrong for the rest of the night. She couldn't. After the dishwasher was working and the floor was swept, she stood on tiptoe to kiss him softly. Why don't we sit on the front porch for a minute? Instead, he caught her to him, deepening the kiss. I have a better idea, and it involves being completely alone and employing our new lock on the bedroom door. He nipped her neck. I promise you'll like it. She laughed. I supposed I could do what you want for a while. After, can we go sit on the porch? Sure. We'll take turns. We do what I want, and then we do what you want. And then we do what I want again. The twinkle in his eyes left her with no doubt about what he thought was a good activity. She laughed. I suppose. He grinned, and caught her hand, dragging her back to their bedroom. I knew you were going to be a good wife from the moment I laid eyes on you. Oh? How did you know that? She asked, watching as he hurriedly stripped, his clothes flying in every direction. Well, you're beautiful. What else could a man like me care about? She sighed. I want you to love me for my mind. He frowned. Well, I don't know you well enough for all that yet, so how about for now, I lust you for your body? She laughed. I suppose that's going to have to be good enough, won't it? Chapter 6. Cindy shut off the alarm on her phone at 5 the following morning, already exhausted. She hated mornings. It was the worst part of running a band bee. She stumbled into the bathroom to take care of business before heading to the kitchen. Her coffee pot was on a timer, and she poured her first cup of coffee, sitting at the table in silence drinking it down before getting up to pour another cup and start breakfast preparations. She filled her second cup of coffee and took one more sip before she started to mix up the batter for muffins. She had a muffin day every Tuesday and would offer at least 3 different kinds of muffins. She always made a few extras, because people from town invariably would come by on Tuesday to buy a few. She didn't know why they were so popular, but they were. She had just put the 6 dozen muffins into the oven when she felt a hand on her bottom, and she jerked with surprise. Trey. Don't do that while I'm putting stuff in a hot oven. I could burn myself. Trey sighed, and reached over, picking up her coffee cup and taking a sip. Cindy saw red. Coffee was the one thing in her world she was never willing to share, and that was her favorite mug. She took the cup from him and calmly put it on the counter on the other side of her and poured him his own cup, trying her best not to say something she shouldn't. Trey raised an eyebrow. I take it I'm not allowed to drink from your coffee mug? Cindy sighed. The one thing in the world I'm not willing to share is my coffee. So keep your grubby mitts off it. He stared at her for a moment, his lips quirking into a grin. I take it you don't do mornings. She shook her head. Mornings are for birds. She took another sip of her coffee. She had stayed awake half the night thinking and knew they needed to have a serious talk, but she would wait until after dinner. He wasn't going to like what she had to say. I'm not particularly fond of them either. Maybe if they started at noon. She just looked at him, waiting to see if he'd laugh at his own joke. He took the hint and slowly backed away. I'm just going to go shave and get ready for my day, he said. Can I come back for breakfast in 20 minutes? Cindy nodded once. She knew she wasn't being pleasant, but mornings were so hard for her. And he drank her coffee. By the time he came back and sat at the table for breakfast, she had another couple of cups of caffeine in her system and felt slightly more human. It's really best not to talk to me till I've had my first pot of coffee. Or 2. She gave him a weak smile. He laughed. I'll remember that in the future. Looking between the 3 different muffins on the table, he asked, Is it muffin day or something? Cindy nodded. Every Tuesday is muffin day. Really? I was kidding. What do you serve with the muffins? Cold cereals are put out if anyone wants them. Why? You don't like muffins? He shrugged. I'm not a big fan of cooked fruit. Why that annoyed her, she didn't know. Cindy went to the pantry and put 4 boxes of cereal on the table, before turning to the fridge and putting a gallon of milk beside them. Opening the cupboard, she brought him a bowl, and then she got a spoon from the drawer. Happy breakfasting. Trey looked at the 4 cereals and picked the only one that had no nutritious value at all, pouring a huge amount into the bowl she'd brought. Works for me. I love Fruit Loops. Cindy pulled more muffins from the oven and dumped them onto the butcher paper covering the counter. She quickly added more cupcake liners to the pan and added batter to each one. So you love Fruit Loops but won't eat cooked fruit? What kind of freak didn't like cooked fruit? She took a deep breath, realizing she was angry, and really had no right to be. He'd done nothing wrong. Sure. I like anything that's filled with so much sugar I can't see straight. Doesn't everyone? Cindy shook her head. So what are you doing today? I've been through some online classifieds, and I'm going to see if I can put my hands on a few used snowmobiles. I can get a good start on them this week while I'm not officially working. That sounds like a plan. She frowned. I haven't added you to my bank account yet. I guess we should go into town and do that today. She felt strange giving him access to her money, though. What was wrong with her that she could give him access to her body, but not her money? Was money really that precious to her? He shook his head. Let me get these for now. I have the funds. The money for them really needs to come out of my business budget. We'll make it work. Cindy frowned. Since she and her grandmother had decided to convert the house to a Band B, Cindy had been in charge of the finances. No one had touched a dime without her approval. She didn't want to give up that kind of control, but he was her husband. Finally she nodded. I guess it'll be okay just this once. He finished his first bowl of cereal and poured another into the milk still at the bottom of the bowl. I'll be gone most of the day. Don't plan on me for lunch. I have 7 different people I'm going to see, and they're all in different directions. Add that to the fact that I don't know my way around at all, and you won't see much of me today. All right. I want to have lunch with Sissy today anyway. She was surprised at how much she missed their talks. She had been dying to tell her friend all about Trey and the marriage. She couldn't wait to see her face when she told her the story of him sitting in just his underwear and Mrs. Graham walking in on them. He finished his cereal and walked over to drop a quick kiss on her forehead. I'll be home for dinner. For a moment, Cindy wished she didn't have to talk to him about her worries that evening, but she knew she did. She couldn't let things go on as they were and stay true to herself. Have a good day. He put his index finger under her chin and tilted her face up so he could kiss her lips. Miss me today? Cindy smiled. I will. She was surprised at how true the words were. At 11:30 that morning, Cindy made sure everything was as it should be at the Band B before making the walk to the bowling alley. She saw Sissy's car parked outside and smiled, thrilled to be able to finally talk to someone. Trey was wonderful, but she needed to have the listening ear of her friend. Somehow she'd thought that Trey would become the only person she needed to talk to, but it wasn't true at all. She walked into the dining area, listening to the crack of the balls on the pins in the main alley. Tuesday was league morning, and all the retired couples in town came out in droves. She sank into a booth and waited, knowing Sissy would be there in just a minute. A basket holding a cheeseburger and fries slid across the table in front of her, and a glass of root beer appeared beside it. Sissy put her own basket and Diet Coke onto the table, followed by the basket of cheese curds they'd share. Every day for lunch it was the same. Cindy felt like her world was upside down, so she was thrilled to see the return to her routine. Things felt comfortable again. Sissy hurried back to the kitchen without a word to drop off her serving tray, coming back a minute later and sliding into the booth across from her. Dish. Cindy grinned. No words of greeting. No, glad he hasn't killed you yet. No, that wasn't Sissy's way. She wanted to know how it was being married to a stranger, and she wasn't going to wait to find out. Cindy popped a cheese curd into her mouth and swallowed it down with a big slug of root beer. He's crazy and sweet and lovable, and he's driving me absolutely insane. Sissy grinned, reaching for a cheese curd herself. Is it going to be a 2-curd basket lunch? 'Cause I can have them throw another in the fryer. No, one will do. Cindy sighed, turning sideways to prop her leg onto the booth beside her. He's super sweet. He was shy at first, but after the wedding night, the shyness completely disappeared. I doubt if I'll ever see it again. She laughed. The transformation in that man pre-sex to post-sex was utterly amazing. So you went through with the wedding night? When? Before you go too crazy, you're not getting a lot of details. It did happen Saturday night, though. He's such an adorable nerd, I couldn't resist. Cindy wouldn't have been able to tell anyone else even that much, but there was nothing Sissy didn't know about her. Sissy's eyes widened. Wow. I was sure you'd tell him he had to wait. Why would I do that? I agreed to this. Cindy frowned down at her burger. And now suddenly I'm having second thoughts. I think I should have gotten to know him better before jumping into bed with him. You thinking about shutting the barn door now that he's had a taste of the milk? Last night, he told me I'm beautiful. Sissy threw a fry at Cindy. You make that sound like it's a bad thing. Cindy fished the fry out of her cleavage and threw it back. Well, that in itself wasn't. I told him I wanted him to love me for my mind, and his response is what upset me. What did he say? Do I need to go over there and kick his butt? He told me that he didn't love me yet, but for now, he'd lust me for my body. Cindy shrugged. At the time, I just laughed, because we were about to, you know. But I've been thinking about it since then. It's all she'd been able to think about since. What have I told you about that? You've got to quit thinking. I know. I know. Anyway, he felt the need to tell me he doesn't love me, right before he took me to bed. What kind of woman am I to sleep with a man who's a virtual stranger to me? The only thing I really know about him is he prefers tidy witties and likes to snuggle after sex. Sissy blinked a few times. I wouldn't have taken him for a tidy-whitey kind of guy. I hope you bought him some boxers. Well, yeah, but that's beside the point. And you need to stop imagining my husband in his underwear, you freak. Cindy sighed. I think I'm going to talk to him after dinner and tell him that I want to wait on sex. I think we need to know one another better first. Holy Batcave. How do you think he's going to take that? I've heard men get testy when you cut off the regular nookie. I really don't know. I feel like I'm doing something wrong, and I need to be true to myself. And my upbringing. Grandpa would turn over in his grave if he knew that I was sleeping with a man I met on Saturday. Sissy nodded. He would, but you're not your grandfather. I think it would have gone better if you'd told him you were waiting on your wedding day instead of doing him. Probably. Oh, and I have to tell you what he did. There's this little old lady staying at the house. She and her husband are there to see their great-grandchild who lives close. Anyway, she's super nosy. Like one of those people who wants to go through every room in the house. Sissy grimaced. I know the type. So I was in the kitchen and I heard a scream from the other end of the house. When I went to investigate, she was standing in the hall outside the office, screaming about a naked man. Doesn't that door have a sign saying to keep out or something? Cindy nodded. Sure does. So he stripped down to his underwear to work, and she walked in on him after ignoring the sign. And do you know what he said to me later? Sissy shook her head, looking as if she was making a true effort to keep her face serious. What? He said it was a good thing his tallywhacker wasn't hanging out. Sissy threw back her head and laughed, a loud sound that filled the room. Tallywhacker? Do people really use that word? Cindy joined her friend's laughter. That's what I asked him. He said we could discuss all the alternatives and agree on one, but I told him tallywhacker would work. OMG, I couldn't believe it. Sissy wiped a tear from her eye. Sounds like you've got your work cut out for you. I do. And I was kind of mean to him this morning, she said with her head down. What did you do? He took a sip of my coffee. Cindy waited for a minute for the words to sink in. He drank your coffee? Does he still have his tallywhacker attached to his body? Cindy nodded. Of course. Then you restrained yourself and I'm proud of you. Good job. I don't think he had any idea how close to death he really was. Obviously not. I hope he knows not to test you like that again. Of course he does. I couldn't let him keep taking his life into his own hands that way. Cindy shook her head. Few people knew how fanatical she was about her coffee, but Sissy certainly knew everything about her. So tell me about your wedding night. Did he carry you off to the bedroom? You're not getting details. He more dragged than carried, but that's all you get. Sissy frowned. Well, how am I supposed to decide if I want to get married if you won't talk about your wedding night? Go read a romance book. You'll figure it out. You need a recommendation? No, I know what to read. Sissy glared at her friend. And here I thought we were best friends who told each other everything. I feel like this whole wedding night thing is a huge letdown. Cindy grinned. It wasn't to me. She popped another cheese curd in her mouth and refused to answer any more questions about her wedding night. Really, even between best friends, some things needed to be kept quiet. Asterisk. Trey got home shortly after 5 that evening, for used snowmobiles in the back of the truck. They looked used. 2 of them badly needed paint jobs, and the other 2 wouldn't start, but he'd gotten them all for a song, and he was looking forward to the work. He'd ordered a book from Amazon on how to fix a snowmobile, and it should be there the next day. He'd had help loading the snowmobiles into the back of his car, but he wasn't sure how he could get them out on his own. Those buggers were heavy. He backed his truck up to the shed, before searching the building and finding a couple of long boards that he used to make a ramp to get them out of the truck. By the time he was finished, he was filthy. He went into the house and straight to the shower, not wanting his new bride to see or smell him. Once he was clean, he wandered into the kitchen and found her where he'd left her. She was just putting the finishing touches on their dinner. Wrapping his arms around her waist, he buried his face in her neck. Do we have time for a little fun before dinner? Cindy's heart sped up as soon as he said fun. How was she going to be able to explain to him how she was feeling without making him self-conscious? She didn't want to make him think he'd done anything wrong, because truly he hadn't. She just needed to get to know him better before she could stop feeling guilty about their sexual relationship. It's just about ready, she responded, loving how his body felt pressed against her back. This is going to be hard. Oh my, it already is. He saw their glasses hadn't been filled yet, so he offered. You want water or milk? Water. I never seem to drink quite enough water. He filled both glasses with water and sat down at the table, waiting while she brought their meal. She was a surprisingly good cook, although why that surprised him, he didn't know. Cooking for a living would teach her to be a good cook even if she hadn't been before. I was able to get 4 snowmobiles today, he told her as soon as she joined him at the table. They're going to take a lot of work, but I think they'll be worth it. I paid very little, and one guy was happy just to have me take it off his hands. No charge at all. Cindy nodded. Oh, that's great. Where did you put them? She had visions of snowmobile parts lying all over her lawn, and she hoped he knew better. In the shed. With this being a place of business, I didn't think you'd be pleased if I left them out in the open. No, I wouldn't have. She took a bite of the chicken spaghetti she'd fixed. Thanks for putting them away. I do want to make you happy, he told her. Sometimes I'm just a bit clueless as to how to go about it. You're a good man. And that's why this conversation is going to be so difficult. I want to talk to you about something, and I want you to hear me out. Let me tell you everything before you get mad. Trey frowned. No good conversations ever started with a warning like that. What did I do? Cindy reached out and squeezed his hand. You haven't done anything wrong. I promise. She closed her eyes, searching for the right words. But I feel like I have. What do you mean? She sighed. I told you my grandpa was a preacher, right? Yeah, so? Well, he raised me to never be alone with a man. I went on one date while I was in college, that wasn't a group date, and none in high school. I haven't dated at all since high school. So really, other than that creep in Ohio, I've never been alone with a man I wasn't related to until we got married. Really? He asked, not understanding why she was telling him all this. Does that mean you've decided not to be alone with me anymore? His eyes were filled with humor as he asked. Cindy shook her head. Of course not. We're married. She took a deep breath. I think we should get to know each other a little better before we continue our sexual relationship, though. He blinked a few times, trying to work out her reasoning. Are you serious? Yes. I know it sounds crazy, but I grew up knowing I would only give myself to the man I loved after we married. Last night, when you said that you were in lust with my body, it really hit home what we were doing. I mean, I enjoy making love. Please know that. But I feel like the only way we know each other at all is sexually. I think we need to get to know more about each other before we can continue the sexual aspect of our relationship. It just doesn't feel right. He sat back in his chair, staring at her as if he'd never seen her before. But we're not doing anything wrong. We're married. I know that on one level, but on another, I feel like we are. I know more about how you kiss me than I do about your likes and dislikes. She raised her hands with the palms up, imploring him to understand. And how long is it going to take to get to know each other? He asked, keeping his voice as calm as he could. He wanted to jump up and shout at her, but more than anything, he wanted to understand what he'd done to make her not want him anymore. He'd tried so hard to be good enough. I wish I could put a time frame on it. I mean, we just met 3 days ago. He nodded stiffly. I'll start sleeping on the couch in the office. No. You don't have to do that. Trey took a deep breath and looked at her, the hurt showing in his eyes. There's no way I can sleep beside you in the bed where I've made love to you the last 3 nights and not touch you. I'll sleep in the office. He pushed away from the table and got to his feet, taking his empty dish and putting it in the sink. In fact, I'm pretty tired now. I'll see you in the morning. Cindy sighed heavily as she stood and cleaned the kitchen. She wanted to chase after him and apologize, but she had done what she felt was right. She didn't want to take it back and let things go back to the way they'd been. No, she'd find a way to smooth things over again. She hoped. Chapter 7. Cindy cried herself to sleep, unsure if she'd done the right thing or the wrong thing, and her eyes hurt when she woke the next morning. She went to the kitchen and poured her first cup of coffee as usual before starting to throw together a breakfast casserole that she'd serve with pancakes. One of the hardest things about being in business for herself was having no one to do the tasks when she didn't feel up to it. And she did not feel up to doing anything. Her head hurt from all the crying. Trey came into the kitchen as she was finishing up the first of the pancakes. He looked as exhausted as she felt, and she resisted the urge to throw herself into his arms and beg his forgiveness. No, she needed to stand her ground. He sat down at the table, watching her work, so she took him a cup of coffee. Good morning, she said softly. I missed you last night. His eyes met hers. You made the choice, not me. He was still hurt by her decision, but he was angry as well. If she'd told him on their wedding day she wanted to wait to make love, he wouldn't have been thrilled, but he had expected her to do just that, so it wouldn't have hurt him. Now that he'd gotten used to sleeping beside her and making love with her, he just wasn't sure where to go from there. She bit her lip, not wanting to fight with him. Instead, she put pancakes on 2 plates and turned the stove off. She'd cook the rest after they'd had their breakfast. She put the plate in front of him and sat across the table, looking at his unyielding face. She wanted to cry some more, but instead, she kept her voice cheerful. Tell me something I don't know about you. Trey looked at her as if she'd lost her mind. Why? The whole purpose of this is to get to know one another better. I want to get to know you, the man, not just your body. She blushed as she said the words, surprised they'd come out the way they did. He sighed. Fine. I'll play your game. He racked his brain for something to say to her. I've always been a nerd. All through school, I never had a girlfriend. My sister, Penny, was constantly trying to set me up with every girl she knew, but none of them were interested. If they agreed to go out with me, by the end of the night, they told me they never wanted to see me again. I had my first kiss in college, and it was more of a dare than anything else. Cindy nodded, acknowledging his words. Thank you. I had my first date and first kiss in college. His name was Mike, and he was in my math class. It started with him needing a math tutor, and I volunteered. During our first lesson, he asked me to go to a movie with him. We went to dinner and a movie, and when he took me back to my dorm room, he made it clear that by paying for the date, he thought he should get a whole lot more than my company. He forced a kiss, and I kicked him. That was the end of my dating, and the end of my tutoring him. What was your favorite subject in school? Trey asked, wondering at her tutoring math. She didn't seem like a math person to him. Oh, English. I used up all my electives on literature courses. My major was management, though. She took a bite of pancake, thrilled they were having a normal conversation. She hadn't been certain they'd be able to do that again. What about you? What was your favorite class? Computer science. I toyed with engineering for a bit, but I just wasn't as interested as I should have been. Computers suck me right in, and I never want to walk away. He paused for a moment. I'm not the kind of man who would ever stray, but you might sometimes feel that I'm cheating on you with my computer. Between gaming and working, I spend 12 hours per day in front of it. She reached out, taking his hand in hers across the table. When he didn't pull away, she breathed a sigh of relief. It wasn't much, but maybe they were getting somewhere. As long as you understand that sometimes my hours are long as well. He nodded briefly, wiping his mouth on a napkin before standing. I'm going to go shower and get ready for my day. I'll see you later. He paused at the doorway. Are you having lunch with Sissy? No. Why don't I stay home and we can have lunch together today? She had to make him understand he'd always come first in her life, even though she'd disappointed him so badly. He shook his head. No need. I'll make myself something. You have fun with your friend. Cindy wanted to chase after him, but she knew she needed to have breakfast ready before the guests started to come down. She shook her head. She should have closed for a week as they worked through things like this. Maybe she should call Lachelle. Asterisk. Shortly after lunch, the doorbell rang, surprising Cindy. She didn't have any guests scheduled to arrive that day, and this wasn't the type of place people just dropped into. She hurried to the door, opening it to see two women who were both around her age. May I help you? One of the girls brushed her long dark hair out of her eyes. I'm here to see my brother. Cindy shrugged. I'm sorry, I don't know who your brother is. Are you Cindy? The girl asked. Cindy nodded warily. Yes, I'm Cindy Lambert. She shook her head, blushing. I mean Cindy Zane. It's hard to get used to having a new name. The girl held her hand out. I'm Penny Zane. I'm here to see Trey. She pointed to the girl beside her. And this is Jean Stewart. I've handpicked her to marry Trey. They're perfect for each other. Her eyes stayed steady on Cindy's, as if daring her to argue with her about it. Cindy blinked a few times. You realize that I'm married to Trey, right? Penny swept past her into the house. I know you guys had a ceremony, but I'm sure you haven't let him in your bed yet. He can get an annulment. She looked around the room like she was the queen of the world, her lip curling a little as she examined Cindy's home. Cindy wanted more than anything to slap her, but she resisted the urge. "Where do you want us to stay?" "I only have one empty room right now," Cindy said, unsure of how to respond to her new sister-in-law. Was she for real? Who announced that a married couple hadn't had a wedding night? She felt like telling her she'd had a wonderful wedding night, but she bit her lip. Penny crossed her arms over her chest. "We can share." Cindy didn't know what the protocol was. Did she ask them to pay? Did they get a free room? How was Trey going to feel about this? Cindy walked to the counter she'd had put in that acted as her front desk and moved around behind it, finding the key to the only available room. "You'll be in room 6. "Where's the elevator?" Penny asked, her lip curling. "We don't have an elevator here. If you want an elevator, you'll have to stay in a hotel. We're a bed and breakfast. Would you like me to give you directions to the nearest hotel?" "Oh, please let me give you directions to the nearest hotel." She didn't want either of the women in her home. "We'll make do." Penny took the key and walked toward the stairs, with Jean trailing behind her. "Have our luggage brought up." Cindy stared after the two women for a moment, before hurrying to the office to talk to Trey. The door was locked, so she knocked and waited for him to open it. She had to pound on it 3 times before he heard her, and finally came to the door. "Who's there?" "It's me. Cindy." Trey opened the door, standing in front of her in a pair of boxers. She couldn't take her eyes off him for a moment, and just stood staring at him. He grabbed her wrist and pulled her into the room, closing the door behind her. Without thinking, she took a small step forward, her hands going flat on his chest. She stood on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his. It was like coming home after a long time away. His arms came around her automatically, and he backed toward the couch, pulling her down onto his lap, straddling him. He stroked his hands over her shoulders, grasping her thighs, to pull her more closely into contact with him. "What changed your mind?" His mouth kissed a trail across her cheek and down to the side of her throat. Cindy tilted her head to one side so he had better access to her neck. "Changed my mind?" she asked blankly, so involved in what he was doing, she couldn't think. "What made you change your mind about making love?" Trey knew he shouldn't look a gift horse in the mouth, but he needed to know. Cindy pulled away. "I never meant to do this." "Oh, Trey, I'm sorry." She scrambled off his lap, blushing profusely. "I came to tell you your sister is here, and she brought some girl she wants you to marry, even though we're already married, and she said that she knew we couldn't have had sex yet, and that we could get an annulment, but I don't want an annulment, and I didn't mean to lead you on, and I'm so sorry." She finished in a rush, knowing she made little sense. Trey took huge gulps of air, trying to calm his body. He knew she could tell how turned on he was, and he just didn't care. It took him a minute to realize what she'd said. "My sister? Penny is here?" What could she possibly want with him? He was married now, and she only ever talked to him to set him up with a new girl. Cindy nodded, running her fingers through her hair as she did her best to calm down. She sat beside him on the couch, her hand going to his, and she squeezed it tightly. "She brought someone named Jean with her." "Do you hate me?" Trey looked at her for a minute before putting his arms around her and gathering her close, in a purely non-sexual way. "I don't hate you. I'm a bit frustrated at the moment, but I'll live." He kissed the top of her head. "Tell me again why Penny is here." It just wasn't making sense to him. Cindy wiped away a tear leaking from her eye. "She said she brought you a girl to marry. I told her we were married, and she said she was sure I wouldn't have slept with you yet." Which kind of reinforces what I was saying about how we should have gotten to know each other first. Don't worry about that part of it. Is she still out there? He looked toward the door, half expecting his sister to pop in at any second. I put them in room 4. She acted like she expected to stay, and she even told me to take her bags upstairs. Trey groaned. Crap. Please tell me you charged her triple. Cindy giggled. No, I couldn't charge your sister. Oh, yes, you could have. And should have. Especially with her dropping in unannounced. He looked down at her. What are we going to do with them? The bowling alley does karaoke on Wednesdays. We could take them to karaoke. Trey nodded after a moment. Penny gets a headache when people sing off-key. That's perfect. I only fixed enough dinner for 2. Should we give it to them and eat at the bowling alley? Absolutely not. If anyone is eating bowling alley food, it's them. What did you cook? He asked, his hand skimming down her side as he leaned forward and kissed her softly. Just sloppy joes. I have the meat made up in the crock pot. Sounds good to me. We'll tell them since they were so rude as to come all this way without letting us know they were coming, or even being invited, they can eat at the bowling alley. Why would she think it was all right to try and set a newly married man up with her friend? That's not normal. Cindy had never dreamed she would be in a situation like this, and she hoped it would be resolved quickly. She and Trey needed to adjust to each other without family influence. Trey sighed. Penny is ridiculous. She thinks whatever she wants will magically happen, just because she wants it. I haven't been able to convince her otherwise yet, but I will. So, you're not going to annul our marriage and marry Jean? He laughed. I think we're past the point of an annulment, and I've never met Jean. He dropped a sweet kiss onto her lips. I want our marriage to work. I've come to care about you. He was amazed at how much closer he felt to her now that they had a common enemy. Penny was good for something, it seemed. Cindy smiled at him, thrilled by his words. They weren't the declaration of love she wanted, but they were better than nothing. I want it to work, too. I'm sorry I've been difficult. He sighed. I think I understand now. Oh, and I'm going to take you up on your offer since Penny is here. Do we know how long she's staying? No idea how long she's staying. What offer? She wanted to climb right back onto his lap and offer him everything, but she didn't think that would be smart at the moment. The offer to share your bed. I don't want Penny to realize we're sleeping apart. He skimmed his hand over her hair. And I missed you last night. Even if we don't make love, I want to be able to hold you while we sleep. And I miss hearing the soft sounds you make while you sleep. Soft sounds? Are you accusing me of snoring? She frowned at him. He shrugged. Maybe a sweet, friendly snore. She made a face. Sissy said that in college too, but I was sure she was lying. He grinned. Nope. But I like it. She shook her head with a laugh. I'd love it if you moved back into our room. Not just for Penny's visit. Forever. Does that mean we can? Cindy sighed. Let's play that by ear. I don't feel like we should, but it's really hard to say no to you. It is? His eyes lit up at the idea. You like it? She laughed. I've told you I do. I just don't quite feel right about it yet. Give me a week? Trey groaned, pulling her against him good-naturedly. I don't want to, but I will. I guess I need to take your sister's luggage up to her. I'll do it. You go do whatever you were planning to do. I was just going to make potato salad to go with our sloppy joes. He stood, walking over to his desk and picking his clothes up from the floor, pulling them on with quick, efficient moves. You go cook. I'll deal with Penny. And Jean. Cindy waited until he was dressed before she hurried back to the kitchen. She hated the idea of him spending time with the girl who'd come there thinking she was going to be his girl. What kind of messed up person was his sister to try to find a girlfriend for her newly married brother? She started some baked beans in the oven while she boiled the potatoes and eggs for potato salad. While she worked, she could hear arguments coming from the front room, and she wanted to run out and tell them they were disturbing other guests, but she knew they were the only people in the house that day. Most of the guests had gone off to the lake for some fishing. You need to at least meet Jean before you say you won't date her. You're being rude, Trey. Rude? You don't think it's rude for you to show up here with a girl for me to date when I got married just a few days ago? You need to stop pointing fingers at me and look at yourself. Trey's voice didn't sound angry, but it was getting louder by the moment. We all know your wife can't possibly be interested in you. She's a successful businesswoman. What do you have to offer her? Trey was silent for a moment, and when he didn't defend himself, Cindy threw down the towel she had just used to dry her hands and marched into the lobby to give his sister a piece of her mind. Do you really want to know what he has to offer me? I'll tell you. Cindy kept her voice calm, but it took everything inside her. He offers me companionship and friendship. He offers me affection and help when I need it. And he offers me fabulous sex. He's a good man, and he doesn't deserve to be treated as if he's your backward cousin who will never get a woman on his own. He has a woman, and she's right here. Penny glared at her. Why are you defending him? I'm his sister. I've known him his entire life. I'm sure you don't know him half as well as I do. You know nothing. Can you not see what a kind, loving man he is? Why are you so blind? Cindy walked to Trey's side, slipping her hand in his. You need to go right back to Texas where you belong. Trey stood looking at Cindy for a moment, a small smile crossing his face. He'd never imagined she could be so fierce in his defense. He turned to her, and used his free hand to lift her chin up, and he kissed her, not caring that his sister was watching. I have a wonderful wife, Penny, he finally said. Go home. Penny stood staring at them, her chest heaving with her anger. I will not go home until you've met my friend and spent some time with her. You'll see that she's better than this tramp. You won't be staying here then, Trey said softly. Cindy was kind enough to give you both a place to stay, even though you came here with the intention of breaking up our marriage. This home has been in her family for generations, and what's more, it's her place of business, and you're simply a distracting influence. Go away. Fine, we won't stay here, but we'll come back every single day until you meet Jean and get to know her. Penny crossed her arms over her chest. This is a place of business, like you said, and your wife happens to be open to the public for breakfast. We'll come back every morning to eat until you give us some time. Cindy sighed. Can we have a moment to speak privately? Penny nodded. Make it quick. Cindy took Trey's hand and led him to their bedroom, folding her arms around him for just a moment, so they could take strength from their closeness. Here's what I think we should do. Let's take Penny and Jean to karaoke tonight, making Penny crazy. I need to do something to get back at her, and that seems to be the only logical thing. Then tomorrow, you can have the two of them help you with the snowmobiles. I'll even pack a picnic lunch for 3. You'll fulfill the promise to spend time with them, and they won't want to stay. Trey thought about her words for a moment, and finally nodded, recognizing the logic in them. That sounds smart. I'll tell Penny that's what we're doing. He pressed his lips to hers, his tongue slowly tracing her top lip. You're awfully special, Cindy Zane. Keep talking like that, and I won't be able to make it through the week, she whispered, her lips clinging to his. He chuckled. You act like it was my idea for us to wait a week to make love again. I assure you, it was not. At all. In fact, I could leave my sister standing out there while I make slow, sweet love to you right now. What do you say? I say you're pretty darn special yourself. She finally pulled away. Let's see what we can do at karaoke tonight. Yes, ma'am. Trey walked back to his sister while Cindy returned to the kitchen to finish cooking. Cindy and I are going to the bowling alley for karaoke tonight. We'll talk there about a plan to see you and Jean tomorrow. Penny visibly winced. You know it gives me a headache when people sing off-key. He shrugged. Those are my conditions. I'll file a restraining order on your friend if you don't show. It's that simple. Mom is not going to be happy you're treating me this way. He laughed softly. You do realize that Mom now lives 1,000 miles away from me, and her opinion on how I treat you just doesn't matter anymore, right? He walked to the desk and picked up a card he knew Cindy kept there. This is the nearest hotel. Go check in there. He pulled his phone from his pocket and looked up the address for the Blevins Bowl, scrawling the address on the back. Karaoke here tonight. You can either eat before you go or eat there. They have great food. Penny wrinkled her nose. What kind of food do they serve? Bowling alley food. He turned and walked from the room and back to his office. He had an hour or two before dinner, and he wanted to work on the website some more. Asterisk. On their way to the bowling alley that evening, Trey held her hand. I'm sorry I got so upset with you about waiting for a week. I should have understood that it wasn't that you didn't care about me. Cindy felt as if a huge weight was off her shoulders at his words. You really understand? Not completely, no, but I understand it's important to you, and it has nothing to do with how you feel about me physically. You wouldn't have been on my lap making out with me earlier if it was a physical thing. She blushed. Thanks for reminding me about that. I just went in there to talk to you about your sister, but, do you know what? He shook his head. What? I'm attracted to you, she said in a loud whisper. He laughed. Believe it or not, I'm attracted to you as well. I kind of figured that out while I was sitting on your lap earlier. You weren't hiding much. They'd reached the bowling alley, and he opened the door for her. Are you singing tonight? She shook her head. No. I'm a terrible singer. Sissy's really good, though. She'll sing. His eyes scanned the bowling alley, which was already beginning to get crowded. Are we sitting with Sissy? Of course. Will your sister and Jean sit with us as well? He sighed. Probably. I can't wait to see her cringe. Cindy laughed. I know I'm a terrible person, but I can't either.